Choosing the right color palette for your painting is a fun and important process, but you're probably wondering, how do you do it? Well, let me tell you, I'm going to walk you through my process and some color theory to help guide you with some valuable tools you can apply to your own creative process. I suggest having a notebook just for color theory and combinations. First, grab a pencil and some watercolor paper, cold press. I use Strathmore Vision. This is a 6x9 pad. We're going to make a chart. We're going to start with color theory, so we need to create our color wheel. First, draw a large circle. Now what we want to do is we're going to create an X just inside of the circle. That's how we start our chart. Then we're going to create another smaller X because we want to end up with 12 pieces of pie. So we're dividing those sections into threes, and 3 times 4 is 12. So now we have 12 pieces. We're going to grab our paint. Because I'm using 2 to paint, I want to make sure I have a palette that I can mix them on. So make sure you do too. So we're starting with the 3 primary colors here, yellow, red, and blue. And again, I'm using Turner gouache. I love this, it's so pigmented. So first I'm applying the yellow. You don't need a lot to start with. If you need more, you can always add more later on. Then we're adding the red right underneath, and then I'll be adding the blue. And here we are, our 3 primary colors. The brush I'll be using today is a number 10 Polar Flow round brush. It's just a standard brush. Rounds are really good to have. They are a more versatile type brush. If it's stiff because it's new, make sure you soften it up by putting it in some water. I use 2 water cups, ideally one's for dark, one's for light. Sometimes I mix them on accident, but I recommend having 2 cups to separate them out. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just make sure my brush is nice and wet to start with because you want the watercolor to flow through the brush. Starting with my yellow, I go back and forth in my brush. Notice how I'm getting all that pigment into the bristles, back and forth. It's really important for a nice flow. And you can add water if you need to as you go as well. So we're going to add yellow to this top piece here. Again, this is a primary color. So our primary colors are basically the colors that are pure. And what I mean by that is no other color combined can create this color. Next, I'm going to move on to my red. And then you want to skip 3 pies and add that next one. So I go over this one a few different times because I want more of a rich pigment. And if you go outside the lines, not a big deal because I do it all the time. I'm cleaning my brush off just so that I get some of that pigment out. And then I'm going to move on to my blue. I'm using more of an ultramarine blue here, so it's more of a basic blue. So again, I skipped 3 pies and I'm creating my blue now. So now we have 3 colors filled in. If you need to go over it several times, do so. So once you're done with that, what you should see now are your 3 primary colors with 3 pies in between each. So what we're going to do now is move on to our secondary colors. A secondary color is a combination of 2 primaries, and those are going to go in the middle blank sections. So make sure your brush is cleaned out and you're ready to go. We're going to start out by creating a green. So that is a mix of yellow and blue. And you can just keep adding until you get a nice green that you like. And you're trying to get more just of a basic green, not too yellow and not too blue, because that'll come later. Now apply the green to the middle section between the yellow and blue, because we did mix yellow and blue together to get green. Clean out your brush for our next color combo, which is going to be yellow and red, which was going to make orange. Again, try to get more of a middle type of color, not too red, not too yellow. we're going to apply orange to the middle section between the yellow and red. And fill it in. Go over it a few times if you need to. Clean out your brush. And now we're going to move on to creating our purple, which is going to be red and blue. So it's going to be more violet. That's what they call it. They don't call it purple in color theory, I guess I should say. So now we're going to apply it to that last middle section between the red and the blue. I'm going to add a little bit more blue to it. Just paint in your little area here. Fill it in. So it looks like we're almost done, but we still need to create our tertiary colors. So tertiary colors is a combination of a primary and a secondary color. To start out, we're going to be mixing green and yellow to get a yellow green. And that's going to be applied in the middle section between yellow and green. At this point, it's probably a little straightforward because you're combining the two colors on the wheel and then applying that in between those two colors. So we just created a yellow-orange. I'm adding a little bit more orange to it so it has some kind of contrast. Now I'm going to go and mix my orange with red because I want to create a red-orange. And that one I'm going to apply between red and orange. So continue this process all the way through. Fun fact, Pythagoras, the Greek mathematician, he was the first documented color theorist, and he associated colors with the four elements: fire with white, air with yellow, water with black, and earth with red. After finishing up your wheel, you want to go in and label, just so you remember. So I use a P for primary and mark my yellow, blue, and red. And then I mark my green, my orange, and my violet for my secondary, and I use an S. And then for my tertiary colors, the colors in between, I use a T. Now that you've created a beautiful color wheel and learned what a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary color are, we're going to dive a little bit deeper and just learn about, well, how do these apply to a painting? For example, color temperature, color families, and complementary colors. Let's move on to color temperature. Color temperature is very interesting in color theory because there are things that are set in place, things that society has based colors as cool and warm. And when you think of colors within their temperatures, I don't think you only think of the actual temperature. I think it ignites a type of sensation. So when you think of something that's blue, say like the sky, you think of, oh, it's going to be a really nice day outside, things like that. And I think those sensations and colors in general, that's why they have such a really big impact on our moods. In color theory, the colors between yellow and red are considered warm on the color circle, and any colors between blue and green are considered more on the cool side. So here I'm demonstrating, showing the red, yellow, and orange that I'll be mixing. Those are the warm families, and colors within those colors are also considered warm. Any color could be made cool or warm depending on what you add to it. For example, if we added yellow to red, we would actually make it warmer. If we added blue to red, then we would be making it cooler. So it can be a little confusing, but think about it. Yellow through red, more warm. If you add, again, a cooler color to it, then it'll go on the cooler side, and vice versa. So here we have our blue, our violet, and our green. Those are considered more on the cool side. Fun fact. So cool colors have a tendency of receding in the space, so going backwards. And warm colors have a tendency of pulling the space forward. So it makes sense with my paintings because I use a lot of bright colors for my flowers, so the warmer colors, the reds, the yellows, the oranges, the pinks, and those always bring the piece forward. And then for my greenery, I use all those cool colors, and those are supposed to be pushing back anyway to create depth. So that's really interesting. Here's a demonstration of changing the color temperature of red. So I have red, red orange, and I'm going to make red violet by adding more blue. So I like to record everything. Use your pencil so you remember. So again, you have red orange by adding a little bit of yellow, and red violet by adding a little bit of blue. And so red orange makes red warmer because you're adding that yellow, and adding blue is making your red cooler. I'm going to do the same thing with the color green. So here I'm using a standard green, and I'm going to be mixing a little bit of yellow with that green, and it made it warmer. And now I'm mixing a little bit of blue with that green, making it cooler. Now let's draw our attention to complementary colors. Complementary colors are the two pairs that go together so well, and they're always a primary and secondary color that are paired together. There is yellow and violet as one pair, and then you have green and red as your second, and then you have orange and blue as the third. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through and kind of show you, break down the color so you get an idea of why these pairs go so well together. Start with yellow and violet. So here I've made two swatches, and I'm labeling them because I always like to remember what color is what. So yellow is your primary color in this pair, and violet is your secondary color. But if you break that down even more, you'll see blue and red make violet, right? But if you look at it all together, yellow, blue, and red, those are all the primary colors. So in all of these pairs, you'll find all the primary. Next pair is green and red. Green is the secondary and red is the primary color here. So in green, you have yellow and blue, and then red being your primary, so red, blue, and yellow again. And then the third one is orange and blue. Blue is your primary, orange is your secondary, with red and orange, or red and yellow making it up. So again, yellow, red, and blue. So complementary colors, they also neutralize each other. So if you mix them together, so if you mix red and green together, you're gonna get a brownish color, and that's more of a neutral color. And they say with complementary colors too, that when you think of a color or use a color a lot, which for example, in my paintings, I use a lot of reds and pinks, and then psychologically, you crave its opposite. So for me, that would be green, and I paint with a ton of green. Think about it in terms of yourself. What color do you like to paint with a lot? And do you end up painting the complement of it? Because if you do, there's a reason for it. It's very interesting. All these concepts and theories are going to be determining factors of what you end up choosing for your painting, what kind of palette. Let's turn to color families. These are a huge determining factor in my color palette. Color families are basically like color harmony. They're all the colors that are within the same adjacent line. So for example, blue, like here I have a light blue, a medium blue, and a dark blue. Those are all considered the same color family. And they all work together because they have a color in common. And I work within these families constantly because it creates a nice harmony within my painting, just a nice balance. And then I use my complementary colors and those colors within their color families. So I'm showing you here just a color family. So you have more of an indigo blue, and then I put more of an ultramarine blue, and then here's a light sky blue. So this is considered one color family. This is an example of a green color family. And remember, they're right next to each other on the color wheel. That's what makes it a family and makes them cohesive. Keeping everything in mind of what we just talked about, I'm going to show you how I created this piece here from my new collection and how I went about choosing the colors. And I used a lot of what we had talked about previously in the color theory, but I'm going to show you how I swatched. So here is my inspiration piece. I collaged some pictures together that I found on Pinterest, but I knew the color palette had to change a bit. So I'm going to start swatching and use, the harmonies and the families and all of that in mind when choosing my colors. Now time to gather the paint. I gather colors that I like or that I have in mind for the painting. It doesn't mean I'm going to end up using them, but I like to have them because I think I might, and it gives me the option. And that way I create swatches for it at least, so I can use it for the next time I paint as well. So I'm gathering cool colors and warm colors. I know for this painting I want to do warm colors for my flowers and maybe a few cool ones as well. I like to create a balance or like a harmony within them because I think it just makes the overall composition of the painting nice and even. So here I have, again, my warms on my left and then my cool colors on my right. Now it's time to start swatching. I've cut down watercolor paper into 3x3s, and these are awesome because you just keep them. You keep them in a folder or in a box somewhere to reference every time you paint, and you'll have them. And that's why it's good to have a pencil with you so that you can record the color or the color combination. I'm going to start by testing out some of my reds because I know I want red in this painting. So here I have a brilliant bright red, and I go over it towards the top and I tap out the bottom just so I can see a different shade there. Make sure to record it. And then I do jewel red, which is a deeper red. And between these, I'm going to start deciding as I get more swatches what I like. Next, I grab my rose, which is going to be a cooler red because it has more blue in it to make it more pink. Sometimes I like to do a side by side just so I can see what they look like when they blend together. I want a yellow, so I'm trying this lemon yellow, but it looks like it might be too bright for what I want. So I'm going to mix a little bit of red into it to create more of a golden yellow. And this is why it's good to know your color families so you know how to warm a color up or cool a color when you need to. I like this color much better, so I'm going to use that instead of the lemon yellow. I just continue to swatch and I create some more oranges, some red oranges. I'm just trying to pick out what flowers I want. And there I have a lilac color that's like a cooler color in the spectrum just to balance it out. But it's still a lighter tone where it doesn't overpower any of the reds. So now I'm just rearranging them to see what I want. So I took out the jewel red because it's too deep to overlap over any of the greens that I'm going to have in the background, and I want a bright color. So that's why I kept with the brilliant red. I would say I have a pretty good variation here. And one thing to keep in mind is these are kind of like your base colors. And then within these color families and all you can create so many different mixtures between them for shadows. So for example, I might use that jewel red to create some shadows with that brilliant red that I had. As I'm looking at the balance here for cools and warms, I'm noticing I think I want another cool color. So I add in this magenta color. So I'll have that rose, that lilac, and the magenta as my cooler flowers. And then that red, orange, and golden yellow for my warmer flowers. Let's take a closer look of what I came up with and reference my painting. So you can see that this brilliant red here I use as the main flower. But if I use that jewel red, then it would be too dark overlapping, and that's what I meant by that. So you have your warms and then you have your cool tones here. And if you notice, you're going from yellow to blue on the spectrum. So what I'm doing now is organizing it in a way where you guys can see that spectrum loud and clear. And this is why they're so harmonious together. Just look at that. I want to show you how I created the color for my wash for my sky. So I knew I wanted to pull the color from the painting that I already created. So I used the saguaro color that I painted pink. So I took my pink and I mixed it in with a little bit of raw sienna, which is warm, and my pink was more, I would say, warm because it had more yellow in it. and I mix them together to create even more warmth. And then using a lot more water, that's how I create the wash. So a lot of these tones and shades, you can create all different kinds of colors by just the amount of water that you use or don't use. So remember that as well. For the sake of time, here's how I time-lapse doing the greens and blues for the greenery. It's the same method, and you'll see that I'm starting to order them in a way where I'm trying to find cools and warms. And just like I did with the flower colors, I'm ordering them, showing them on a spectrum from going from warm to cool. And you can see how that's how they all are in harmony because of how gradual you can see it going from like more of a warm green to like a cool blue. I want to demonstrate one last thing here. So you have your color like this indigo here. You can create so many different tones from this one color just depending on how much paint you use and how much water. The more water towards the bottom, the lighter the wash. And again, that's how I created my backdrop here. I find this last tip very, very important. So here I have red mixed with black and green mixed with black on this left side here. I rarely ever use black in my work, and if I do, it's mixed with a color like this. And the reason for not just using pure black is because it is such a harsh color. So I suggest if you have to use a dark color, use indigo or deep purple or something like that, because it can have a tendency of overpowering your work and maybe even flatten the piece. The method I just taught you is the same method I use to create these watercolor kits for you guys in my shop. And it's such a great method because then you collect your swatches and you can use them when you are trying to figure out a palette for your next painting. Here's a closer look at my final painting so you can see all the colors, the color families, the harmonies, the complementary colors, the cools, the warms, everything we talked about, just as a closer look for you guys. So I hope you guys took some notes and use this method for the next time that you create your painting. Don't be afraid to create your first mark, and until next time, see ya!